Welcome to Revving Up with David Ross. I'm your host, David, and we are so excited to finally be in studio, ready to do this stuff, and I'm looking forward to spending some time with you. My guests have been so hard to nail down, and I finally got one lined up, and then I had to cancel on him a couple of times, and I'm behind schedule, and I thought I need to get in the studio. I need to do something, and so if nothing else, I'll show off and play around with some of the equipment I have in here today. And for those that are watching on YouTube, you can see the video improvements. Hopefully I sound much better. I think I do. And we're just going to have a lot of fun. I do have a topic I do want to talk about, so we will be getting to that here in just a minute. But for those that are watching the video on YouTube, this is the me talking by myself view. And then if I ever have a guest, they'll have their own microphone. It will be a different color. I am working on trying to replace that. But I ended up with a white microphone and a black microphone, and then I could not get a cover for it except a blue one. And so we're a little mismatched on the colors, but they're going to be able to sit there. And then from time to time, if we're both talking at the same time, having a conversation with each other, we'll be able to do that. And then finally, when I get to the ending, you'll see my ending frame coming up. So anyway, I've had all these toys to play with, and I've enjoyed doing it. I want to give a shout out to Rode. They are not sponsoring me. They did not give me any of this stuff. I paid very dearly for some of it. It was not a small investment to get this stuff in here. I have different brands of cameras that I'm using. I'm just a mess in here. Hopefully the lighting's good, but we're going to continue working on everything. I do actually have a green screen behind me that's bringing the on-air stuff, and so I've got a massive green screen. And all of this is in my office that I work from home in during my day job. And so welcome to Revving Up. Welcome to my new studio. Welcome to better sound. Welcome to video. Welcome to it all. I really wanted to do my first recording with a guest so we could have some fun with it and show it off to them and enjoy that. And like I said, I've had one lined up for the last 2 Fridays, and both Fridays I've had to cancel, and I've got another one that we can't seem to get together on our schedules. He frees up here in another week or so, and then I've got another gentleman that I've been talking to, and it's kind of a running joke between us now because I said, hey, do you want to come do this? He said, I'd love to. And I said, okay, let's get some dates. He says, okay. And that was his last text. And so a day later, I text him back and say, oh, okay, when? And I saw him in person this last week, and he said, I really want to do that. Let's get together. And I have not heard a thing since. So he's quite busy as well. So we're going to get some people in here. We're going to have some actual podcasts where we talk about topics together, bounce things off each other. But for now, this is what you've got. And let's go ahead and dive into today's and I'm going to leave that in there. I will not do a lot of post-edit on my recordings. I'll cut off the beginning and the ending as I'm setting things up and tearing things down. I want to be as authentic as I can as I'm doing this. Obviously, if I have a huge flub, I'm going to edit it out. But I want to just be able to come in here, try to speak from the hip, so to speak, and speak what's on my heart. I do have a tablet in front of me. I have not started it up. I thought I'd look at my notes, but that's a little distracting. And so on occasion, if I'm doing something that's got a little bit more detail to it, I will certainly be referring to something kind of off screen, off camera while I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing. But otherwise, I hope to just be able to engage with you and look at the camera as much as possible, even though you're not really there and you're just looking at me through your screen. So thank you for joining me. I know that I have not been as regular as I intended to when I started this thing out, but we're going to get into the flow and enjoy ourselves and have a good time. So what I want to talk about today is it's a topic that our church has been going through here for the last month. And I had the privilege of being one of the speakers on Wednesday nights as we were going through this series. And so it's a topic that I think is either ill-addressed, not addressed, or addressed in a poor manner among many churches and many movements. And it is a topic that comes up a lot when you look at the background I'm in. I am a Pentecostal. I've made that absolutely clear. up front on day one. And I am a Pentecostal minister. I am licensed. I'm actually getting ready to go, hopefully soon, for my general license with the UPCI. And so one of the things that we're known for in the Pentecostal movement is these holiness standards. You'll often hear them talk about standards or church standards or holiness standards or simply holiness. And the unfortunate thing that's happened in a lot of movements is, in a lot of churches, within our movement even, is that the association with the holiness standards becomes the definition of what holiness is. And so we've had several speakers from our church going through some of the things about holiness, what holiness is not. And one of the things we want to make clear, and we really came out in the whole series, we've actually had 4 Sundays and 4 Wednesdays. We just wrapped it up today, is the fact that holiness is not about the rules and the regulations. Okay, holiness is about a relationship. It's about the heart. And Paul addresses a lot of this stuff in his writings, and we see it throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. So my take on the holiness on the Wednesday nights was looking at what did the children of Israel have to deal with in order to be considered holy in their time? And so the journey we took with them was through the conquering of the land of Canaan and the fact that they didn't follow through on everything God had told them to do. And so therefore they ended up in trouble because, it's promised to Abram, and then it's repeated over and over and over again throughout the Old Testament that you're going to get a land. And it's going to be your land, and it's the land of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Hivites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Jebusites and all of these ites, right? And the instruction to Abram first, and then instruction to Moses, and then the instruction that Joshua brought forth was, you are to drive these people out. Okay, they were to claim this land of Canaan and all of these sub-tribes and groups that were associated with that region because it was promised to Abram. And there was a multifold purpose in taking this land. One, it was a promise that God had given Abram when he was first called and began to seek after God. He's walking in this region, and God tells him in a promise one night, you see the stars? That's how many children you're going to have. And this land you're walking on, I'm going to give it to your descendants. And so he made that absolutely clear that that's what he wanted to do. But another reason that God called them to that was to exact God's judgment on these lands for their idolatry and their wicked practices. And what we find is that the children of Israel did not. And so they were left. And I think in the sovereignty in God, he knew that they were going to mess it up. And so in the start of the book of Judges, which is leading up to the kings, so they've conquered the land mostly. They've occupied the land, but they haven't fully driven these people out. And so in Judges, I think it's chapter 3, but early in Judges, there's a statement in there that God left those peoples there to test the children of Israel so that the children will learn to do war, and as a means of testing the nation of Israel to see if they would stay true to God. And so had they done what they were intended to do, we don't know how the story would have played out, but God knew how it was going to work out. And so that's what we end up with. And so we end up with immediately they mess up as they go into the promised land, right? They get Jericho, they get Ai after a little bit of a detour there. And then a group of people approaches them and basically fakes them out. One of these Ite groups comes to them and says, we came from a long way away, and they had old clothes and old food. And, and so, Joshua didn't bother to check with God. Well, it's obvious these people came a long way. And it turns out they're next door. They're the next group of people over that they were supposed to drive out. And so immediately they're left in a covenant situation with a group of people that God never intended them to make a covenant with. But because they didn't consult God, they ended up having these people living there. And then as they progress through the book of Joshua and into the early part of Judges, it turns out, and Joshua kept telling them over and over again, hey, you haven't taken your land yet. You haven't driven these people out yet. You need to go finish doing what God has promised for you. And they did not. And so then God says, all right, we're going to leave them to test you so that your children can learn to walk with me and see if they're going to serve me in the middle of these people. And so you end up with this mess that we end up with in a lot of the Old Testament from that point on. They're constantly at war with these groups of people. They're constantly adopting the practices of these groups of people. After the kingdom was split, after the reign of Solomon, and we get the divided kingdom, we end up with these people being a thorn in the side. Solomon set the seed. He started the ball in motion because of all the wives he had, and he started allowing them to worship their God. And then Jeroboam, and there's an interesting insight on that one. that I'll come here in just a minute. One of the gentlemen that I'm trying to get in here to talk about this stuff and talk with him, he dropped this one on me at a meeting we had. We had a breakfast the other day, and he dropped this in the middle of the table for everybody to consider. And so Jeroboam set the standard for evil for all of the kings in the divided kingdom. You'll read multiple times in the Old Testament that they'll say that so and so was a king, they were a bad king, and they followed after the sins of Jeroboam. And so it's like, if you're going to have a bad king, here's an example of what a bad king is. He was so rotten that he set the standard. And it turns out he was the first king of Israel in the divided land. And so that's a whole other topic that I'd like to get into at some point. But one of his sins, one of the major sins he did, was idolatry. He began to worship, not only allow the worship of these other gods of the region, he began to do so himself and encouraged the people to do so. And so that's what set this whole thing in motion that eventually drove them into captivity and drove them out of the land. And so what does that got to do with holiness? Well, that ties into the thought of holiness. God told the children of Israel, you are precious. He called them a precious people, a treasure. You are selected. I didn't choose you because you were more numerous. I didn't choose you because you're the most beautiful. I didn't choose you for that. I put my name on you. You are my people. And I want you to serve me the way I want you to serve me. And here are the guidelines by which you do that. And so you can look at that and say, well, God's just trying to set his people apart for. No, he intended, and it's in the promises, and it took Peter and Paul in the New Testament to finally get that revelation fully, is that God has always intended to be the God of all nations and the God of all people. He told Abram, I'm going to, through you, I'm going to bless all nations. And so from this nation that I'm forming in you, from this relationship and covenant I have with you, you are to be the light and salt for the world, and I am going to establish myself as the God of all the nations. And so the nation of Israel lost that because they got so concerned about being separate, they forgot that they were only intended to be set apart. Yes, separate, but really set apart. And that's what holiness is about. And because the children of Israel did not be the salt and light that they were intended to be, God had to come in and take them out of the land and basically destroy them and to try to get their attention. And then many years later, through the line of David, we get Jesus entering the scene to set everything back in motion again and put it the way it really was meant to be when he stepped on to the scene. And so you've got this people that are called to be salt and light, and yet they end up looking like everything around them. They ended up looking just like the nations around them. They began doing the exact practices that God had told them over and over and over again not to do. And we're not talking just, oh, well, they were worshiping this idol, child sacrifice. Okay, if it tells us in the Old Testament that the nation of Israel fell into the same sins as the lands around them, we know that some of those nations, those ites that they were conquering, were doing child sacrifice. They were doing human sacrifice. They were doing evil and wicked and corrupt things. So again, some of those nations, they would have, if they're under siege, they would offer up a human sacrifice to the god of that city to help them. So whether it was a captured opponent or an unwilling citizen, whatever, they're literally taking people's lives in order to try to please their gods to do things. And if Israel's falling into the same sins, it doesn't say specifically, but there's no indication they didn't either. And so what were the children of Israel doing? They looked just like everybody around them. And because of that, they lost the ability to show people what God really wanted them to do. And it's such a shame because the relationship that God wanted with them was one of love and peace and joy. I have set my name upon you. I will bless you. I will extend mercies to you and your children for 1,000 generations because I'm the God. I'm a holy God. I want you to be holy for me, but it's not this burdensome thing that I want you to do. It is a joy to be able to serve me and to be that light and example for the rest of the world. And they flat out missed it. And it took Jesus coming on the scene to finally bring that revelation about and understand that he is a God for everybody. And so Jesus did that. And so holiness is indeed set apart. We don't do things that other people do. We do things that other people do not. That is absolutely true. I don't dress the way a lot of people in the world dress. I don't walk and talk like a lot of people in the world. I monitor my speech, and it's not just the cursing part. It's all aspects of my speech. Do I mess it up? Yes. That's why the mercy and grace to 1,000 generations comes into play. But my goal is to not do that, right? I don't watch the same entertainment that the rest of the world watches. I don't play the same video games that some of the world plays. Why? Because I'm trying to maintain that specialness that God has for us. Okay, Peter brought it forward to us because God called the nation of Israel a holy people and a nation for him. And then Peter brought that forward and said, you are a chosen generation. You are a royal priesthood. You are a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who has brought you out of darkness into his marvelous light. And that's what God's called us to do. But in order to do that, there's got to be a distinction between me and somebody that's unregenerate, between me and somebody that doesn't have that relationship. Somebody should be able to look at my life and say, he doesn't do like everybody else around me. Not in a weird way, not in a condemning way, not in a way that's trying to make myself puffed up and above everybody else, but just because I'm different. And I want to be different. That song, I kind of almost quoted it there. I don't walk like I used to walk. He made a difference. I don't talk like I used to talk. He made a difference. What a change. And so the life of serving God is a life of joy and peace and love and all the fruits of the Spirit and all the provision and the promises of God. Why would I want to put any of that at risk by acting in a way that's contrary to what God wants me to do? And so we get so focused on the do's and the don'ts. We get so focused on the rules and the regulations, and that falls over into legalism real quick. But the counter to that that's happened too much, I believe, in Christian culture today is then they don't talk about holiness at all. And they don't establish any standards at all. And they don't have any guidelines whatsoever that would distinguish you from the people of this world. And then, so you're not salt and light anymore. If I walk, talk, act, behave, and do everything like somebody that doesn't know Jesus, how am I going to point them to Jesus? What is it in my life that is compelling to them, or at least different or unique, that would draw them to that? I need to have that in my life. And so holiness is intended for that, so that I can be a light and shine in a dark world. And it's not to just be separated. And this is something I think in the Pentecostal movement we've done in the past a little bit too much of. Because we can't go to the same entertainment venues, because we can't go do the same activities, and we can't go do this, and we must do this, and we're in church all the time, and we do that, and we wear these clothes and stuff like that. It's hard to walk among a world that's unregenerate at times. And so what we tended to do was isolate ourselves off. Well, if I'm not comfortable around these people that aren't like me, let me get around everybody that is like me. And so we became very insulated and insular and inward facing in our beliefs and our behaviors and our actions. And that's great. I need that. I need fellowship of the body. I need to spend time with the people of God. I need to be sharpened. I need to edify and lift up and be edified myself. I need that. I need to be trained. I need to train. I need to mentor. I need to be mentored. I need that in my life. But that's not the only thing I need, because if you just take a bunch of flashlights and you put them all in a room, then the rest of the house is dark, right? If everybody is in the room giving each other salt and salting each other, but the rest of the world's bland because the love of God's not present there, what good am I doing? And so separated, yes, but my contention is it's more set apart. And so the best example I could come up with was the idea of a formal place setting. And, Emily Post would be very disappointed with me. I don't know what fork is what for what, and I don't know what spoon I'm supposed to use, and I don't know where they're supposed to be arranged. But I do know that in a formal place setting, for like a formal dinner, there are utensils given that are set around the plate, the main plate, and you are to use them in a certain order for certain things, right? You've got the salad fork and the meat fork, you've got the soup spoon and the teaspoon and the other spoon, and this knife for that and that knife for that, all that stuff like that, right? And so each of those utensils is set apart. The soup spoon is intended to be used on the soup and only the soup, but it is part of the set. Right? I can't, if I take the soup spoon and I set it on the other side of the table, it is separated, but it is useless to me because it's not with the rest of the set. I can't take advantage of it because it's on the other side of the table. So it needs to be in the set, but set apart for the purpose that it's designed. And so are we. We are to be in this world, but not of it. I walk among people every day. And if my last lesson, it hit me so almost comically, talking about Jesus at the supper where the lady came in with the alabaster box and broke it on his feet and wept and washed his feet and dried it with her hair. And the thought of the Pharisee was, if he knew that this woman was touched, what kind of woman this was, he wouldn't be allowing it because she's a sinner. And the thought just hit me. Who isn't? I mean, who's not a sinner? We're all sinners. I've been saved by grace, but I am a sinner saved by grace, trying to live holy before him. But everybody I encounter is a sinner. And to kind of get your little haughty thing, well, she's a sinner. Well, guess what, buddy? You were too. You weren't justified before God. In fact, he used you as an example in one of his parables. He talked about the Pharisee and the tax collector that go to the temple. And the Pharisee says, and it's kind of interesting, the Pharisee standing there praying, and the Bible says that he was by himself. He prayed to himself or by himself. And I'm thinking, yeah, you weren't with God and God wasn't with you because you were arrogant. And I'm so glad I'm not like this guy. I do all this great stuff. But then the tax collector, the sinner, asked for mercy and he went home justified. Right. So we're all sinners. And so, but we need to be sinners and we need to be redeemed sinners walking around in the world that we encounter. I need to be set apart, but I need to be in the set. I need to be among the people of this world. And that's what holiness is all about. The evil, the sin of the world will not jump on me if I interact with these people. God help us. Yes, we need to be holy. Yes, I need to live different. I need to act different. I need to think different. And I am nowhere near what I used to be. God has been good to me. I've been growing. I've been maturing. I'm getting better at this stuff. But at the end of the day, I'm just here to be a salt and light for the world, to shine the love of Jesus and extend grace and mercy to everybody I meet. And so I just want to leave that with you today, to think about holiness in that way, because if you look at Jesus had a lot of things leveled against him and accusations that were not true. They accused him of blasphemy. Well, had he not been God in flesh, that would have been blasphemy. They accused him of saying he was going to destroy the physical temple that they worshiped in and build it in 3 days. He was talking about his body. They accused him of condoning sins, just letting people get away with it. No, Jesus was very hard in his teachings. Jesus was very resolute. He did not compromise anything. Sometimes the things that we're asked to do for being holy are hard. And that's just the way it is. And Jesus didn't compromise on that. He had a large group of people following him around because he's feeding them. And then he turns to them and says, if you don't eat of my body and drink of my blood, you have no part in me. And they all start leaving. And he didn't go running after them and begging them to stay. He was not worried about building a crowd. This is the truth. If you want it, then you've got to do these things. He told them, take up your cross and follow me. Okay, so he's very resolute, and he was interacting with a fallen, broken world, and yet Jesus was absolutely, totally, completely holy. And so encountering the world, encountering people in the world does not taint me necessarily. If I start doing those things and partaking in those things, absolutely. But I can encounter people that don't know Jesus, that are living unregenerate lives, and that's not going to diminish me. It will not diminish any of my holiness to sit down and talk to somebody and tell them about the love of Jesus, invite them to church, invite them for a Bible study. It will not reduce any capacity of my ability to continue walking after God just because I'm encountering people that don't know him. Jesus did that. He did it fully and he did it perfectly. He never lost an ounce of his holiness, and yet he touched and he uplifted and he did all the things that he did. And so, yes, he did care. No, he didn't condone sins. And he did all of that stuff in a life of holiness. And we are called, it's very clear, You must be holy, for I am holy. We're told elsewhere that if without holiness, no man shall see God. And so if I'm going to get to the other side and stand before him with confidence on that day, I must live a set apart, holy life today. But it's not about the rules and the regulations. It's about the attitude and the relationship that I have. The holiness stuff, whatever you think holiness is, search it out. There are some general guidelines and principles that you should follow. You like clothing, you must be modest in your dress. And that's not necessarily the length of a skirt. It could be the how tight are the pants on the man. There are some men running around that are not wearing very holy clothes because their pants are so tight. I don't need to see anything. That clothing is intended to cover and to hide, not to reveal and to show, right? So that's one thing of holiness. My speech must be different. I must not use the words that other people use. All of that stuff like that. But it's got to be done out of a love and a relationship. Why do I do the things that I do? The holiness, quote unquote, standards, the holiness things are boundaries to me. They're boundaries. They set the edge. I will not go beyond this point. But while I'm within those boundaries, I am free. I am free to live for God the way that he has designed for me to live. I am free to serve him. I'm free to love him. And every promise and every blessing and everything he's considered for my life that's good and perfect and wonderful to be in my life is a result of the promises he's given me, and I don't want to ruin that. If I'm special to somebody, I don't want to do things they don't like. If I'm in a deep relationship with somebody, I'm not going to go out and do things that I know are counter and antithetical to maintaining that relationship. Those boundaries are there for a reason. A couple examples here, and then I'll start trying to bring this in for a landing. In the Old Testament, in Exodus, when Moses has gone up to get the law, the power of God, the cloud of God descends on Mount Sinai, and he tells the people, don't touch the mountain. But I don't know if you've ever been around a mountain. Where does a mountain start? How can I know that if I stand here, I'm not on the mountain, but if I take one more step, I'm officially on the mountain? The beginning of a mountain is very hard to determine. But God told them, don't touch the mountain. So what I'm thinking I would have done, I would like to think, is that wherever I think that mountain started, I would be a good quarter mile further away, right? Because I don't want to be found touching the mountain. That was a boundary that God had set for them. Don't come any further. So I don't think my job in that situation is to say, well, let me see how close I can get and not be on the mountain. I'm not going to push up against those boundaries. Those boundaries are there to protect the relationship, right? And so another example I give is in my life. I don't text other women unless my wife is included on the text chat. And if I happen to do that because of a certain urgency or something like that, I show her. I don't even wait for her to ask. Hey, I just had a conversation with so-and-so. Here's what we said. And I show her the text string. Why? Because I want to protect that relationship. I don't want to let anything possibly enter into the conversation or my thought processes that this is anything more than a transactional thing with another woman. I'm married to Tanya, and that relationship is special. I need boundaries in my life so that I don't cross over a line I shouldn't cross. I don't go places with women by myself. And I had a couple of situations where that was forced upon me. And so one time was at a lunch thing with work, and we all went together, and then a bunch of the guys had to leave early, and I was left with one of my female coworkers to get back to the office. And so I got on the phone with my wife, and I talked to her on the phone the entire trip back to the office. Well, David, you're being ridiculous. That's a little over the top. It was nothing. I'm sorry. I don't want anybody to be able to say anything happened or anything was said that shouldn't have been said in that setting. I need to protect that relationship with my wife. So that's a boundary. You can call that holiness to my wife. I am set apart for my wife. And so therefore, I'm not going to interact with other women the way that I interact with my wife. because that's where the relationship is at. That's where the covenant is at. And it's the same thing with God. God has called us to a life of holiness. And he's called us to a life of holiness so that we can be the people of God that he wants us to be. I'm going to come back to one last point as I bring this to a close. Jesus told us, and again, he didn't apologize. He didn't compromise. If you're going to follow me, the way to heaven is narrow, and difficult is the way, and few there are that find it. Broad is the way, easy is the way for those that want to go to destruction. But if you want to go after God, it's a narrow way. And so he absolutely made that clear. There are ways to do things, there's ways not. And then he told them, and I've already alluded to it, take up your cross and follow me. And God is revealing to me in recent weeks that, at least in part, because when he says take up your cross, he doesn't specify what your cross is. Your cross is not my cross. Your burden for him and your service to him is not my service to him and my burden to him. He's called you for yours. He's called me to mine. But God has been talking to me about what my cross is. I've been asking him very specifically, what is my cross? What is that which you want me to carry as I follow you? And he's begun to show me that, at least in part, some of the burden, some of my cross are those that I encounter every day. I am to take those people, place them on my shoulders, and carry them up a lonely hill and place them at the foot of the cross so that the blood of Jesus can speak to their lives and they can be redeemed and they can enter into this precious relationship that I am so privileged to be in. That is part of my cross. And I can do that, and I can be holy. I can be set apart, and he can use me if I remain set apart. We had moves of God. We still have moves of God. We had moves of God in the days gone by, the early Pentecostal movement. The UPCI turns 80 this year. They were established in 1945, so they're having a big celebration. So 80 years of this particular body in the organization that it's in, the combining of two different movements at the time. And those people had moves of God. And God would show up. And it looked strange and it looked weird, but it was powerful and it was life-changing. It was impacting because they lived holy lives. They prayed. They fasted. They prayed. They fasted. They did things. They didn't do things. Why? So that they could get in tune and be in a relationship with God. And God honored that. And that has become part of my daily prayer almost, is, God, I want to see a move of God in my church, in my life, in my home, like never before. Not so I can brag about it, but so that I can see lives impacted. My grandchildren need to see this. The people I encounter need to see this. God is good. He is merciful. He is kind. But he wants that relationship, and he wants me to be part of the reason that they're in that relationship by being the salt and the light. And if I look like everybody else, I'm not going to have the impact that I need to have. And so he has called me to a life of holiness. If you're a fellow believer, he has called you to a life of holiness. If you're not a believer and you hear this recording, I am not in any way casting aspersions or judgment on anybody. I invite you to encounter a God that is going to treat you as a person and as a treasure and not as a product like the world does. And I promise you, if you'll surrender it to Jesus, your life will never be the same, and you will not want it to be the same. You can't put a price on the peace I get at night. You can't put a price on the joy. You can't put a price on feeling the presence of the God that made you. It is something that is irreplaceable. And whatever I've got to put into my life and whatever I've got to take out of my life, I am more than happy to do it because I want to preserve and protect that relationship. And with that, that wraps up today's session. I enjoyed having a chat with you, showing off some of my equipment here and things like that. And so we will be getting together here in a couple of weeks. I still have somebody scheduled for this Friday. Hopefully I won't have to cancel. This last Friday was one of those days. You ever had one of those days? I had one of those days last Friday. I had to mop up a floor from a toilet problem, and then I had a dog that had a seizure that for the first time ever. So I was out way too much money on Friday going to a vet to see what's wrong with my dog, who has absolutely no symptoms and no indication that there's anything wrong. So one-time thing, misinterpretation by the people that were grooming her that claim this would happen. Who knows? But now we got that on our radar. But God's been good. And I'm able to face those things and know that his promises are still true and everything is well. And I'm so glad that that's the case. So with that, I'm going to wrap this up. This has been Revving Up with David Ross. I'm your host, and I look forward to seeing you around next time.